part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 324, The Last Days of Leia Orana Solo. I know that sounds super ominous, and maybe it is. So a few weeks ago, we were talking about the novelization, and it was during that time that I'd mentioned that there were a number of passages that really kind of caught my attention. Some of the things that were written in there, the way they were written, were just, really stuck with me and motivated me to kind of think, well, you know what, we probably should do a little bit deeper dive into the novel and really kind of pull out some select passages and some of the quotes and do some analysis on them. So that's what this show is going to be about tonight. We're going to obviously focus on Leia and her role in the novelization. But in here to help me do all of this is somebody that's been here before, and she's back again. So please welcome the last hope, Makayla. Makayla, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Albert. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. How'd you like that title, The Last Hope?
The Last Hope. Good. It's pretty good. I'll take it.
Is it fitting? You'll take it? Yeah. We're going to talk about that a lot because that line, I guess, The Last Hope is used quite a bit here. And I think there's a lot of significance to that. So we'll get into that in just a minute. We don't really have any news to talk about today. So what I thought I'd do is, a couple weeks ago with Mike, I asked him a question about, what are you looking forward to in Star Wars? Because we're going into this period of Star Wars. I'm not going to call it the dark times, like the 80s, mid to late 80s and all that. I'm not going to go that far, but we don't have any movies coming out, right? There are no big budget films coming out. We know we've got a couple things in the works, and we're obviously looking forward to that. But this question's about, now that we're going into this, I'm going to call it a dry spell, although it's not. It's not, to be fair. To be fair, it's not a dry spell, but limited stuff coming out. What is it that you're looking for? Like, what's driving you? What do you think is going to keep you interested in Star Wars? Is it the High Republic? Is it Mando 2? Cassian Andor? Something we're not, or is it maybe the anticipation of something we've not been told about yet? What's going to keep Makayla going here?
Well, I think they've done a really good job with Disney Plus in general with The Mandalorian, right? So I really am looking forward to see what they do with Mandalorian with the second season. But the Cassian Andor, I'm really looking forward to see how they take that story. Cassian was such a good character, right? We all loved him. I think I'm really excited about that. Yeah. Yeah,
that he stood out as definitely one of my favorites, Diego Luna. I thought he did a great job in it, and we've talked about it on the show. Especially, we probably beat this horse to death, but just this idea of a character like Cassian, who has been in the fight for so long, right? There's that famous quote: "Some of us been fighting this war since we were 5 years old, or whatever, or 6 years old." I may have the years wrong, but anyways, but somebody that's been in the war that long, but then it still stands out for me, like that shot where he shoots the guy at the very beginning, right? Because he realizes that he's dead weight. And if he doesn't ditch him, they're both going to be shot, killed, arrested, whatever. And, it's going to be it's going to impact the rebellion. So, just somebody that's able to be that callous or that cold about it. But at the same time, you realize why he's doing it. Just so committed, to the effort. I think there's a lot of story there. There's a great, great deep character. And yeah, you got me going now, because this is like the one thing I'm looking forward to the most probably is the Cassian Andor series.
Yeah.
But, how about High Republic? Are you going to pop into that? How are you cautiously optimistic about it, or are you jumping in with 2 feet?
Cautious. The word here is cautiously, right? I'm looking forward to the new, era, an era we've never really seen before. I think that's going to be exciting. But coming along with that, there's going to be so many things that are just so uncertain, right? But I'm sure. I don't know. It's just it's a hard one to answer for me. I love that style of work, right? Just like the old timey type things. Even though it's Star Wars, they have got a history. Yeah. I'm kind of looking forward to that aspect. But other than that, I think I'm just going to wait to see what rolls out when it's finally time.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how that goes. And I don't know. And right now, as of this show, as of this show, we don't have anything else that's been officially announced outside of some of the things that we just mentioned. So who knows? There may be something here in the next couple of weeks, next couple of months that will spark our interest. You know, things are kind of put on their head too now. That Celebration is no longer happening. So who knows what could come from that? Rise from the ashes of that. So. All right. Well, let's get into our main show with Leia Organa, and I think what I'd like to start is kind of just throw this question out there to you, maybe in your own words, like, you know, who Leia Organa Solo is. So when you think of Leia, I mean, who is she first a person to you? Like, is she Princess Leia? Is she Leia Organa Solo? Is she General Solo? You know, who is she to you, and what does she mean to you personally?
She'll always be my princess, I think. I mean, Leia is such a special person in my heart, and I'm sure so many other people can say the exact same thing. She has such a big impact on all of us. She's such a powerful woman in this story, like from the beginning right up to the end. She's so important, and in my life personally, she's just been a figure to look up to. So that's who I think Leia is.
Yeah, and I think I go back and forth on whether or not she is the most complex character in Star Wars. I think it's a tie between her, maybe Ben Solo. I think it's hard to argue because, I mean, we just have so much history with Leia, right?
We've got 47 years, however many years.
Exactly. And we don't really have that much with Ben, but we just know that Ben is so complex. He's such a complex character, and trying to get in his head is just, futile, right? And in all these years, she's had so many different titles. And she's wore many proverbial hats, whether she was, a daughter, wife, mother, princess, senator, general, Padawan, master, right? I mean, she's been like all over the place, and had, just done a lot of different things. And there's probably more. I mean, there's probably more titles that I'm not thinking of than, but I mean, it always goes back to that code of royalty, right? She'll always be, for me as well, I think she'll always be Princess Leia, at least in my head.
Yeah.
Even if she was like a stark contrast to that person later in life, she never changed being a rebel. That's her one thing, right? She's very consistent throughout all her life, being rebellious, being gutsy, being smart, being calculating, deadly. I mean, these are all words that come to mind. You're thinking, wow, what a woman, right? I think in later in life, she was all those things. She just went about it a little differently, maybe a little bit more maturely. And personally, I mean, Leia was there, but she, for me, as growing up as a kid, but she wasn't as influential as somebody like Luke for obvious, like female, male, boy, girl, reasons and child tendencies, right? I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. And my sister, though, she was really into Leia. And I thought it was cool. We're brother and sister. They turned out to be brother and sister. It's all good. And she's only like 3 years younger than me. So she was my, playmate growing up for a lot of our years. But it really wasn't until I got into like college where I started meeting friends that were into Leia, and then a bigger one, female friends. Whoa, right? Finding people that were female that liked Star Wars in high school was few and far between. And when I get into college, there's like a lot of people there. So some of them were girls, which was shocking and surprising for me. It just opened my eyes. But I could tell she was very, very influential. I had a friend who just went on and on about how much she was inspiring to her. And as I got older and became more mature, I realized just where this was coming from. And I have to say, as cheesy as it sounds, I can tell you firsthand that most of the women or the girls in my life that I saw relationships were definitely had characteristics of Princess Leia, like her profile. And so I think from that point of view, I mean, she definitely influenced me, and I just, didn't even know it.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are all great qualities to have. I mean, who wouldn't want to be the daughter of Princess Leia or the husband of Princess Leia, right? Or have a daughter that has the personality traits of somebody like Princess Leia. Anyways, so from here, and because we're going to focus on the novelization, and for the rest of the conversation, I thought we kind of focus around a couple of different roles, and we're not going to be able to tackle all of them because they don't really get into all of these roles that I mentioned earlier. in the novelization. But, things like Padawan, we definitely see a bit of that. We see her as a Jedi Master. We see her as a rebellion leader, as either the general, right? And then, of course, we see her as a mother. And there's bits and pieces in here where she's kind of talking about, her they talk about her as a mother. But let's start with Padawan Leia, because we learn a few things in regards to Leia as a student, namely that she was extremely powerful, and maybe even more potentially powerful than Luke himself. Is that how you took it? I mean, and also how powerful do you suspect Leia had the potential to be?
Yeah, that's definitely how I took it. Especially during the scene when she's got that flashback and she's upside down. She's doing that that handstand thing, right? And then she starts floating, right? She's like, "Did you do that with Yoda? Did you do that on Dagobah?" Right?
Right.
And he's just amazed. He's like, "Wow!" Right? And then he eventually says later, just naturally, she picked up these things naturally, which I think is just awesome. I think she was definitely, in my head, I think she was more powerful than Luke. She just didn't go into it, right? And that might be controversial, but that's definitely how I took it.
No, well, hold that thought, because I want to come back to that. As somebody who is a lifelong fan or fanboy of Luke Skywalker, I have some thoughts on that. But let's touch on that passage real quick, if I could, because that is one of the ones that where it's pretty explicit in terms of just how powerful she is.
Yeah.
And there's a really good fun, tongue-in-cheek thing that's going on between them. But it starts off, what's that?
Siblings.
Yeah, his siblings, right? Yeah, and throughout, right? I mean, even at the very end, we're going to get to when he's bugging her. But anyways, so this is early on. For those of you that have seen the movie but have not read the book, early on when when Rey is training. Leia is training. There's a flashback, and you get to there's some back and forth that go between her and Luke is training her. And so they call back to the training that Luke went through on Dagobah, and the infamous shot of him, standing on one hand, and, R2 starts floating up and the rocks start floating up and Yoda starts floating up, all that. It's back to that. But the passage says, and somehow she ended up standing on her hands while Luke slung good-natured taunts at her, which is funny. Even from the help of the Force, her shoulders had started to burn, her arms wobbled. They'd already spent the last hour sparring with their lightsabers, and her body was exhausted. Luke had said, his voice smug, when I did this on Dagobah, Yoda was sitting on my feet. He said that a lot back then, when I did this on Dagobah. It was obnoxious and completely unhelpful. So Leia reminded him, you're being obnoxious and completely unhelpful. I also did it one-handed, he said. And then that's the part where you'd mentioned. So at this point, Leia decides, to kind of one-up him.
Oh, yeah.
She ends up floating off the ground. If you imagine somebody with their arms out to their sides, left and right, straight across, and making a T, and then flipping her upside down like an inverted T, that's exactly what she was doing. And then I think after she's done, I think she asked him, so did you ever do that kind of thing, just to, kind of throw it back in his face, which is, I don't know how the Force works, but that seems way more powerful. Especially if this is early on, right, in her Padawan training.
Mm-hmm.
There's another great line in here too. Another cool passage where he's talking about her ability and her training, and this picks up immediately after Leia, in the flashback scene that we see in the movie where they're sparring, and she kind of bests him, and he's kind of on the ground, and we get the reveal of their faces and that whole thing. It's right after that moment, I guess it's like the roles reversed. He does it to her, and they're just kind of going back and forth. But anyways, she's on the ground now. He's standing up, and he says he reached down, help her up. Your footwork is terrible, he said. Don't get me wrong, your lightsaber craft is coming along, but you do other things naturally. His face turned apologetic. What I mean is you're exceptional, just different. Then he had smiled with that wide farm boy grin that stayed with him all the way up until the night of Ben's betrayal. Leia shook off the memory with effort. Memories were coming fast and vivid these days. She was glad for this one, though. It would be the key to training Rey. Leia and Rey were different, the last remnants of a dead order, and together they would carve a new path. So I chose that passage because it speaks to what you had mentioned earlier about her being just a natural talent. Mm-hmm. And we talk about Luke Skywalker and just how limited he had. He didn't have a lot of training, right? I mean, he was too old to begin the training, first off. And then he had a very small time frame in which he was trained. And it did feel like Luke was struggling. I mean, did you ever feel like he just picked this up naturally, or did you feel like he was really struggling and fumbling through the...
There was definitely a struggle there.
Yeah. And then we get somebody like Leia, who is more of a natural. And this is going to all play into a question a little bit later, but this is very similar, I think, to Rey, right? Rey just picked all of this up. Like it was effortless for her. And this, again, it plays up a little bit later. But going back to that question about whether or not she was more powerful than Luke, I absolutely believe she was more powerful. And again, this is coming from somebody who's, dyed in the wool Luke Skywalker fan. And I like the idea that she was. I like the idea that she was able to just naturally pick this stuff up where, don't get me wrong, he was very powerful. He probably just had to work at it harder.
Yeah.
Maybe almost like a Ben Kenobi, right? You think about like Ben Kenobi versus Anakin Skywalker. I always felt like Anakin Skywalker, it's pretty obvious, he picked it up too. He was just a natural, right? Effortless. Runs in the family, exactly. Whereas somebody like Kenobi was extremely powerful. Whether it was, in his lightsaber combat, or whether it was in the ability to use the Force and manipulation and all that. But it felt like he always had to work at it harder. Like he really had to put a lot of effort in to get there, and he did it because that's who he is. But this just didn't come as natural to him. So I like that. I like the parallels here between Luke and Leia and Kenobi and Anakin, and then with Rey in here too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a little bit about her training. We got word that she was training with Luke Skywalker and then stopped. She just stopped training altogether. And they kind of talk about this in the movie a little bit, right? That she sees a vision or whatever. But what else did we learn? Or I guess what other notes do you have in here in terms of reflection on either Leia's training or why she stopped training with Luke Skywalker altogether?
Well, for some of her training, I thought it was interesting that she said she had learned from Obi-Wan and also Yoda, right? She had those instances where she was able to interact with them, even after they've become one with the Force. So I think that was interesting that we got that input. Because I didn't see that coming, right? But why she stopped, it says in the book as well, right, that she foresaw her son's death at the end of her Jedi journey. Not only that, but she also had visions, right? This is what she told Rey. She said she had visions of just a different path, right? She was called to a different life.
Yeah. And she says, another life called to me. Leia had visions of leaving to become a general. She had feeling of serving the galaxy in different ways. She says, I knew when asked about the visions. She just knew that it was kind of time for her to go.
Yeah.
And that's super interesting that she had those visions too, because it goes back to, I don't want to steal it. I'll come back to that in a minute because I want to go back to The Force Awakens and their first meetup together. Because I have this question out there that I'm going to ask you, spoiler alert, about just how much did Leia know about Rey, and when they met for the first time. There was, definitely a reason why she had kind of stopped doing it altogether. She said that I think Luke said Leia, told me that she had sensed the death of her son at the end of the Jedi path. And then in that line, that same passage, Rey responds, "Oh," and then it says, "Rey breathed." That was it. The thing Leia had been holding back. So earlier on, when they're training on Ajahn Kloss, when they're training, there's a moment there where Leia kind of pauses when she's talking, when Rey asks her, why did you stop training with Luke? And she kind of changes the subject almost immediately.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't want to, really get into it. But I think in that moment too, I think she really does know exactly what's going to happen. I think she's already seen all of this. Maybe not, word for word, line for line, or moment by moment, every second by second. But she definitely has an idea of what's about to happen here, and it's all kind of coming to fruition here. And at that point, the rest of that passage says, she surrendered her saber to me and said that one day it would be picked up again by someone who would finish her journey. Rey stared at it. Was she meant to have this? And so that's in chapter 14. I mean, we're jumping quite ahead of here, but, this is where Rey's questioning whether or not she's, early on, she's questioning whether or not she's worthy of running with, using the lightsaber. And then once Luke, and that whole passage, that passage I just read comes from when she's already met Luke, and Luke directs her to Leia's lightsaber, which is kind of hidden in one of those little huts there on Octu. But yeah, I mean, Rey is already questioning about whether or not this is all kind of the will of the Force, and whether or not this was, all kind of meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot going on there in terms of the visions and why she left, which will all come to head here in just a few minutes. There was also let's talk about Luke's disappointment. When Leia left, Luke was disappointed. In fact, she says he was disappointed, but he understood. I think he had held out hope that I'd return to it someday. And then in that one line, well, first of all, let's talk about Luke's disappointment. Any thoughts around whether or not he felt like she would come back to it, or do you think she was wrong there? Do you think Luke was just like, okay, yeah, I get it, but you'll be back? You think Luke knew exactly what was going to happen, or was he just more concerned about trying to start up the Jedi Order at that point?
I think he was probably more concerned about starting up that Jedi Order, only because really at that point, there's not a ton of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
He wants to have as many allies, right, as he can that are Force sensitive, and having someone like his sister, someone he's close to, someone he can train with, I think is really important. And I think having her leave, not so much that he was disappointed in her, but more so he was disappointed that, this is just another thing I'll have to do on my own.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the one thing that stood out for me that passage there was where he says, I think he held out hope that I'd return it to it. And every time I see this in the book, and the word hope, again, I meant to do a search on this and I haven't had a chance to do it, but the number of times that the word hope is used just throughout the novel is crazy. Like it seems like it's used. Yeah. It's just all over the place. But I think of hope. I think of New Hope. I think of the Last Hope, which they talk about in here. And then it all kind of keeps going back to that one line of, no, there is another, that Yoda echoes and says in Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And that being Leia at the time. But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it too. I think that, yeah, he's disappointed, but he knows that there's always hope, out there. But yeah, I think you're right too. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of people, like you said. He needs to get this thing started, and what better person to have than somebody who's just naturally gifted and talented in the Force, who just happens to be his sister. That powerful Skywalker blood,
mm-hmm.
says in The Last Jedi. All right, so I'm going to read a passage just very shortly here, and then I'm going to ask you a question about it. And this is in chapter 14, I believe. But it says, Rey frowned. Leia didn't need patience. She could have made anyone do anything she wanted with the power of the Force. Surely she'd been tempted. And then later on, there's another passage that says, Leia was stronger than all of us, Luke said, which made Rey wonder, had Leia ever been tempted by the dark side? In all the stories she heard, in reading Luke's journals, studying with Leia, she had never once heard of anyone ever trying to turn her, the way Vader and the Emperor had tried to turn Luke, the way Kylo had tried to turn her. Maybe of all of them, Leia had been unturnable. So this got me thinking about whether or not, was Leia ever tempted? Do you think she was ever tempted by the dark side? Do you think anybody ever tried to tempt her? I mean, who would that even be at this point, right? I mean, it's Snoke or Emperor Palpatine, but, Snoke would be the likely one, I would think. But who do you think she was ever tempted, and do you think she could ever have been tempted to turn?
I think it comes with the whole Force sensitivity, that acknowledging that there is dark and light and picking a side. I think, like, even Yoda was tempted, right? The Clone Wars. I think everyone has, just to be human, or not human, but to be a species, right? And who's Force sensitive, you have to have been tempted, at least tempted, right? And I kind of looked into this a little bit more, because after seeing that question on the notes, I was like, I hadn't really ever thought about that. And obviously in the novel, Rey's thinking about it, right? And
mm-hmm.
I looked into it, and in Bloodline, right, the novel, you know what Bloodline is, but
for
those who don't know Bloodline, it's just kind of the story. It comes before The Force Awakens, like 6 years, I think, before The Force Awakens. And it just kind of goes through just like the politics, really. But it's with Leia's involved, right? And near the end of the book, there's a little excerpt, and I wrote it down just because I wanted to have this portion to explain to you why I think she has been tempted. It says this is talking about Jabba the Hutt when she killed Jabba, right? Yeah. It says the sheer strength it took to compress a Hutt's neck. She had summoned that somewhere from deep inside. Pure hatred had fueled her. That sounds pretty dark to me. Now, was that the Force? I don't know. But just reading that again, I was like, oof, that sounds like, from somewhere deep inside of her, she had summoned it. What is that other than the Force? So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and that's it goes back. That harks back to the line of once you start down the dark path, forever it will dominate your destiny. That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think I think where what we're probably not saying is there's a key distinguish different. What am I trying to say? I don't want to conflate the two, right? The idea that somebody is tempted and the idea that somebody turns,
yes,
are not mutually exclusive, right? You can be tempted, but not turn. And I think it's fair to say that Leia, being just, again, human, being a person, not being perfect, can be tempted. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what they're saying in that passage there, that she was definitely tempted. There was an evil act that was done. But she didn't turn. And I think she's one of these characters like Rey, who as I don't know, as powerful as the dark side is, it's very difficult to think that they ever could have been tempted or be turned.
Yeah.
I don't think Leia could be turned.
I agree.
I don't. I think she can come real close. We've seen her do something maybe evil like that, or maybe she thinks it's evil, right? I
think she's too stubborn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She's not going to let anything change her mind on what she wants, right? And what she wants is to be the hope and to be the light and all of that. So yeah. Now, good quote there from that novel. Okay, so let's talk about. I want to go back to The Force Awakens, and I'll just throw the question out there because we've already talked about it. But I mean, when she sees Rey, they had that hug, and at the time when that movie came out, there was a lot of speculation as to why that hug lingered. There was talk about, Leia has never seen her before, doesn't know her, right? So, and that was that was when we were all focused on, okay, well,
who are her parents?
Yeah, exactly. Is that her mom? And if it's her mom, then how does she not know? And they've hugged, but then there was something there, right? I mean, there was definitely some kind of a connection, and then a lot of people just kind of dismissed it as, well, Han died, and they were both kind of in that moment celebrating him or mourning him in some way, and that's why they were so emotional and so connected. But you got to think now, especially with this novelization and what we know about her, and just how vivid some of these visions were of her, what was going to happen in the future. You got to think that at some point she's seen that face before, or that she had seen Rey, or she knew how this was all going to pan out, or maybe she saw that moment, right? Maybe she saw that moment where Rey gets off the ship and walks over to her, and Chewie walks by without saying a word. But maybe that was it. And so when they did hug, maybe it was Leia that was holding on a little bit longer than she wanted, because she realized, holy cow, this is all really starting to happen now. But I don't know, what are your thoughts? Do you think that she had seen her in the vision at that point, or did she know her?
I think maybe she knew her presence. Maybe not so much her face, but you've got the Force, right? She can feel Rey, right? Yeah. They can feel each other, and I think in that moment it was more of just like a realization, like, oh, this is the one who I'm going to train, right? This is kind of the one who I'm going to. I don't know what she saw in her visions, right? Did she see that she was going to be training someone down the line, right? Mm-hmm. And if she did, is this the moment that she saw? I don't know the answer to this one, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, there's another passage, so a couple of sentences really that kind of speaks to this a little bit later. And it says, I gave him my lightsaber to convince him otherwise, told him to pass it on to a promising student someday. But Leia's voice had grown tight. Rey sensed she was holding something back. This is, Yeah, that could very well be it. We don't really have a clear answer on that one.
Yeah.
There's another one that kind of speaks to her visions again, and this is between Maz and her, but it says when Leia didn't answer right away, Maz waved the question away with a flicker of her fingers and changed the subject. I know you fear Rey's pull to the dark side, that you've had visions of her death. So,
Yeah.
I don't know when those visions are or were, right? Obviously, in the novel, and we've not mentioned it, but in the novel, they allude to Maz being force sensitive. So, spoiler alert, right? She's force sensitive in some way. She's probably not able to manipulate it and all that, but it seems like she's more of like an oracle. She has visions, or she's able to get in touch with people, or you think about, and this just changes your not me. I hate Maz Kanata, but it changes your perspective on her lines, right? If you think about all the lines that she said, all the 15 lines that she's had in the movies. But no, seriously, a lot of those lines now, if you think about them from the perspective of somebody who's force sensitive, they take on a big different meaning. And we're not going to get into that because that's not part of the show. The point is, Maz and Leia were definitely in communication with one another. They were talking about their feelings and talking about their visions and force stuff and all that, right? And so she tells Leia that, hey, that I know you've had visions of Rey turning to the dark side. Okay, well, if she's had visions of Rey turning to the dark side, was that post The Force Awakens, or is she talking about visions of a girl who just happened to turn out to be Rey, or maybe it was Rey explicitly? And were those visions before The Force Awakens? Because Maz and her have known each other for a while. It's just it's not clear in the novel, but I think it's kind of mind blowing if it really truly is something that happened before The Force Awakens.
Yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of the next question I had. It was just how long did Leia know about Rey? And it's hard to say, but there's definitely little clues here and there that kind of set your mind wandering in a lot of different directions in timeline. So
yeah.
Okay, so what about we learn also that Leia is very doubtful as a Jedi Master. I mean, this doesn't come easy, being asked to train the last hope of the Resistance and of the light side. I mean, all that pressure is on her, and she's frustrated at times, much like Obi-Wan was with Anakin, and I'm sure Qui-Gon was with Ben Kenobi, and it's just very typical. We saw that a lot in the Dooku novels, Dooku as well. Jedi Lost. There were a lot of frustrations that were coming from the masters and seeing what they were going through. And Leia is no exception here. She's not, able to pick this up and really starts doubting, whether or not she's able to do this. And she stays committed though. So I guess the question here is really about, why did Leia stay so committed to training Rey, even if she was doubting herself at times in her ability to be a master? I mean, apart from the obvious being, okay, I have no one else is around to do this. And I know she has to do this. It's part of her, destiny, facing her fear and facing Kylo or Palpatine, whoever that may be. But outside of that being the obvious, why else is she so dedicated and so committed to training Rey?
I think she sees herself in Rey a little. And not only that, but Luke mentions to Rey after Rey's kind of thrown that fit and has gone to Acto to, seal herself away, right? And Luke comes up and they're having that discussion. He mentions that Leia saw Rey's spirit, saw her spirit. He said she saw your heart, right? So I think just that connection there is really important to why Leia did it. Yeah.
There's and that the line that kind of really speaks to this. It says and it's Leia kind of speaking out loud. She says, "Oh, Luke, I hope I'm doing this right," she thought. Leia was no Jedi Master, but she had learned from the best. And not just from Luke. Over the years, she had occasionally heard the voices of Obi-Wan Kenobi through the Force, and even more rarely that of Yoda. Some days it felt as though she had learned from the Force itself. So yeah, I mean, she's almost pleading with Luke in that moment for like, please help me, right? Help me get through this training. And I think this all kind of bleeds into this idea of, the be with me thing.
Yeah.
We heard Rey chanting that, and I remember until the novelization came out, I kept one of the questions I had was just why is she trying to connect with the voices, the Jedi that had come before her so badly?
Yeah.
And there's obvious reasons. I mean, you would think, right? Okay, well, if she had somebody there like a Luke or a Ben Kenobi or a Yoda, then they could help her train, right? I get all that. I'm not saying that. What I'm asking is, why is it so essential though? right? If Leia has a training, what does it say about Leia's training? And that's kind of where my mind was going. Well, maybe Leia is at the point where she's like, I really don't know how to do this. I've only taken her so far. Maybe it's a Kanan Jarrus moment. Kanan was very candid with Ezra and telling him, look, you've already learned everything I know how to teach you. I wasn't a Jedi. I wasn't trained as a Jedi for very long because of what happened, during Order 66. A lot of what he had was kind of self-taught, and he kind of hit, there's a certain point where he just kind of hits his level in terms of what he knows and his understanding of the Force. And so he was always telling Ezra, you're done here. There's nothing more I can teach you. You need to find somebody else that can kind of help complete your training kind of thing. And I feel like this is kind of that same moment for Leia. Like, she's already hit, as natural as she is, as gifted as she is in the Force, she never completed her training. She only had so much that she had learned with Luke. And so she's at this point now where she's like, I don't know what else to do. So, hey, tell you what, here's what I do. Whenever I need help, I can connect with my brother. I can call up Ben Kenobi, sometimes Yoda when he's not busy, right? Maybe this is something that you need to do. You need to go out and learn how to do this. You need to do the be with me so that you can start connecting with these guys so that they can help you kind of take you to that next level, kind of continue on with your training and all of that. So, that was kind of a theory that I had. I think, and it's an obvious one, but it does feel like we get confirmation in the novelization that that's kind of what's happening here and why that's so important. And of course, it plays off later on. It plays off big time, right? The payoff is, from a movie perspective, is that's how she ends up being able to beat Palpatine, because they do hear her and they do connect with her and they do empower her to become all the Jedi. And then she's able to kind of take down Palpatine from that perspective. But it was much more simple in terms of why I think she was originally trying to connect with the Jedi that had passed.
Yeah.
So I had this question about this, and now that we've talked a little bit about hope and the other and all that, but I had the question is, were Leia and Rey both the last hope? And so I'll frame it and I'll let you answer. But the reason I'm asking this is because, we get the line from Empire Strikes Back, that boy's our last hope. No, there's another. And then we get, there is another, is the one line that, I think we talked about this on the Art of book that I did with Josh, but that line was just something that had stayed around for so long, and it never really got fulfilled. We never really found out what that meant, other than like a safety net or something, right? But there's another one out there, and just in case everything goes wrong, we at least have Leia. So we'd always refer to her. I'd always refer to her unofficially as, the last hope. Luke is the new hope. She's the last hope. But then you think, well, okay, wait, about Rey though. Rey is kind of our last hope. In fact, there's a line in there where Maz and her, I don't think I have it here. I thought I had it here. I'll find it here in a minute. Oh yeah, here it is. So Maz and her, this is right after Rey leaves. She just takes off, and Maz and Leia are still on Ajan Kloss, and they're talking about Rey leaving. And Maz says, if she finds Exegol, she just may survive. And it says, like Leia, Maz occasionally caught glimpses of people and places, presence and features through the power of the Force. Like Leia, she rarely understood what they meant. And then it says, but if she doesn't, Maz added, the galaxy will surely not. Leia had done her best to hide her own worry from Rey, if not her affection. That girl might be their last hope. That's the line that said from the novelization, that girl might be the last hope. And so, so that's where the question comes. Is Leia the last hope, or is Rey the last hope?
Well, Rey could not have done what she did unless Leia had sacrificed herself. So if you think about it that way, I feel as though it is Leia. Now Rey might seem as the last hope, in their situation.
Yeah.
But it was, in my mind, it was Leia. It was. Again, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. You can't really. Obviously, I don't think Ben Solo would have been able to do what Rey did without her, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think Rey would have been able to do what she did without Ben coming to rescue her, right? So, in that case, in that sense, Leia is kind of the puppet master here. If it wouldn't have trickled down from what she did, it wouldn't have ended how it did.
Yeah, she's kind of it's all predicated on her and her actions and all that. It's very similar to the question of a chosen one, like who was the chosen one, right? And trust me, I'm not trying to dig that up because that's blasphemy. People start talking
It's
about
a
that, but
can of worms. Yep.
yeah, it is a can of worms. But you talk about like the chosen one prophecy and what does that mean? A lot of people have different meanings for it. I don't know. Some of it just feels like it is. It's about perspective. Right. It's kind of like the lightsaber thing. I've mentioned this before on the show. Like, whose lightsaber was that? Is it Anakin's? Um, is it Luke Skywalker's lightsaber? Is it Rey's lightsaber? It's all about perspective. It all depends
Yeah.
on who's looking at it and what time frame we're talking about, right? And same kind of thing here to some extent. I get it. I'm not disagreeing. I don't know if there's a right answer or not, to be honest, about whether or not Leia's the last hope or Rey's the last hope. It's however you want to interpret it, but definitely something that runs parallel to that. The chosen one, the lightsaber, the Skywalker lightsaber, that kind of thing. So all very good stuff. And there's one other thing here too. You mentioned it about whether Leia saw herself in Rey. I think that's absolutely true. She sees her as a naturally powerful person, gifted person, just like she was. I think the fact that she didn't have Ben around, right? She never had. I mean, this is somebody that potentially could be around the same age or, more or less. I mean, they're like, I don't know, 9, 12 years difference between the two. But, she's been without Ben for so long. She doesn't really have her child with her at this age, but she has Rey. So, I mean, she sees her almost kind of like a motherly figure in that aspect, right? She gets to do that. And plus she's living with the regret and the remorse that she had let Ben leave. And I think they mention that, or she mentions it in the novel. We kind of already knew this, but that's like her biggest regret in life. It's all the things that she's been through, all the heartache that she's been through, all the ups and downs that she's had, whether in all these different roles that we talked about. The one thing that she regrets more than anything else was the day that she let her son get on that ship and leave with Luke Skywalker. And so from that perspective, she's got almost like kind of a start over, right? It's a fresh start. She's got somebody here that she can train and somebody that she can care for and love and that sort of thing. Even if it isn't her own daughter, and even if it is knowingly the daughter of Palpatine, right? She still takes it upon herself to train her. Rey finds out a little bit later that that's the case. That she went ahead and trained her anyways, in spite of all this. It says a lot about where Leia's mind was, right? In terms of, why she decided to take it upon and why she kind of, stuck it out and tried to train her. So here's the more obvious question that I had was, did they see each other as mother and daughter? And we get confirmation in there. But is that how you saw it in the movie? Did you see them as mother and daughter type roles? Either, Force Awakens, Last Jedi. Well, they really weren't together in Last Jedi, but Force Awakens, and or The Rise of Skywalker.
I definitely did. You've got Rey, who doesn't have any parents, right? Well, as of The Force Awakens, she didn't know anything about her parents. Then she's introduced to Han, right? Obviously, she saw a father figure in him. Mm-hmm. He passes, and then she bonds with Leia, right? Even that moment, right, when we talk about the hug. Just those connections. And then she goes with years with Leia, just being around her constantly. She's not going out on the trips with the guys, right? Poe and Finn are upset about that, but she's staying back. She's staying with Leia. She's training, but she's still with her master. And I really think that bond just grew as they were together so often. And Rey tells Luke, she tells Luke that she found a mother in her, right? So It's just one of those things where it was that bonding time that they spent together.
Yeah, that was a little bit later on when she's talking to Luke Skywalker. That line you were just referencing says, "Master Luke," she tried again, "I have visions of things that frighten me." And she's talking to Luke. Let me stop here. She's talking to Luke, but she's trying to talk to him through the Force, right? And there's no response. She's just talking out loud. It says, "Master Luke," she tried again, "I have visions of things that frighten me. I don't want to lose this. Leia is how I dreamed a mother would be. And my friends, I don't want to let them down." And so, it's like, you can't have any more hard confirmation than that she did see her as a mother figure, which kind of plays into The Force Awakens and the whole parental thing and all that controversy. But there's another line that's quickly in here. I won't read the whole thing, but it says, but as Rey's eyes continued to plead with her, Leia had to face the truth. Rey needed more training, it was true, but the real reason she couldn't bear to see the girl go was that she'd grown completely fond of her. Luke had told her that the Master-Padawan bond was strong, but he hadn't warned her that she might come to see her apprentice as the daughter she'd never had. Now, that's right out of chapter 4. So, you've got Rey looking at her as mother, and you got confirmation here that through that Master and Padawan relationship, that Leia started to see her as the daughter that she had never had. So, yeah, a lot of they're very emotionally vested in one another, which I think is great. Like, because I don't think we get that we don't get that in the movie. I mean, you get that they're hugging at the very beginning, and she's leaning on her, and you can tell she confides in her. But for me, when I saw the movie, and even today, if I went just back and watched it, it just feels like that's the Master Jedi and Padawan relationship, right?
They've
gotten
really
to that point.
It's not even their fault either, right? They only had so much footage to work with.
Sure.
When it comes to
I get it. Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Totally fair. That's not a knock on the movie. That is just an observation that if you watch it, and that's why I think the novelization is so great, because it gives you these moments like this that really kind of take that relationship to the next level. And literally, I mean that. It takes it to the next level, which is awesome.
Yeah.
There's this line. There's several moments in this book where Rey is asking, what would Leia do? I think Poe says it too, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong there, but it makes me think of you remember the whole, in the 90s, there was the what would Jesus do thing, and you had the bracelets, and is that still a thing? Is that still going around? I'm sure it is.
I don't think so. I mean, people who still have those bracelets still wear them, but
yeah, do they? Okay. And you would see them because it just says WWJD, right?
Yeah.
And it was like braided with, I don't know, yarn. I don't know. What's not yarn? I'm out of my element here, as you can tell. But anyways, but it's just funny that thing is in there, and they say that several times. And I'm not saying that they're looking at Leia as this, godly figure by any means. I don't think that's where they were going with it. But it is cool that Rey has several moments in this novel where she just has to stop, pause, and think, what would Leia do, right? Yeah. And it just speaks to that. We do that today. I mean, I do it today. I think about people that I've learned from and looked up to and respected, whether they were personal friends or relatives. But we all do that, right? We kind of take a step outside of ourselves and go, okay, let me look at this objectively through someone's eyes that I trust. And we kind of do that because we're seeking that deeper wisdom, and we're seeking a deeper guidance in that moment. And I think that speaks a lot to how their relationship was and how Rey looked up to her, and maybe the knowledge that Leia was able to part totally absent of the Force. I mean, this lady has lived an amazing life, has seen so many things and done so many things in all of these different roles that we've talked about. And what a benefit for somebody like Rey to have her as a master in the Force, but a master in just life and becoming a woman and all of that. So I think it's definitely where that line kind of stems from. Let's talk about, we're getting to the end here. No pun intended, but let's talk about the last days of Leia. And it starts off pretty funny because, I mean, Luke, he's such a pest. I mean, that's exactly what I think. I think there's a line in there where she actually mentions it about him being a pest. Well, no, being relentless. But for those of you who haven't read the novelization, in the movie, we don't get this, right? You have no idea that this is happening at all. But Luke is throughout a couple of the chapters. It starts in chapter 4. He starts like reaching out to her, like, okay, it's time to go, kind of thing. I need you over here. You're going to die. But he's doing it. Like, there's one moment where he's actually kind of being funny about it, and there's actually a funny moment. But it starts in chapter 4, and it says, Leia, came Luke's voice. No, Luke, Leia whispered back. It's time, Luke said. He'd been pleading with her for a while now, and his voice was relentless, as if it came from within her very own soul. And then she responded back with, not just yet. So he's almost like, this is way back in chapter 4. He's already telling her, hey, let's go. You're right. Time's up. You got to join me, that kind of thing. And then later on in chapter 11, and I guess this is the maybe the funny part. It says Leia. I'm sorry. As Luke, Leia came her brother's maddening voice. It's time. I can't, she told him. There's too much to do. She felt his understanding, his love, maybe even a touch of amusement. And then he says, there is only one thing left, he said, and then you can rest. Dizziness overtook her. She felt herself falling, the edges of the world caving in on her. She was vaguely aware of Connix's arm wrapping around her, boosting her. The lieutenant's worried voice said, "General?" Connix guided her to her quarters. Leia just needed to lie down for a bit. That's all. So there again, so he comes back the second time. And then the final time that he reaches out is a little bit later in chapter 13. And it says she's in the middle of kind of giving this speech about how the Millennium Falcon, they seen it. It's on its way to Exegol, right? So they know that Rey is alive and Poe and Poe. I always do that. Finn and Poe, right? They're all alive, and so she starts in on this like speech, right? And Leia says, "I'm pleased to report that the Millennium Falcon sent us a transmission on long range." She said, "Their mission is back on track. Everyone is cheering, clapping. Let's start another sentence that's interrupted with Luke saying," she's about to start another sentence, and then suddenly Luke interrupts her and says, "Leia." And then she says, "Of course." He chose the end of her speech to interrupt. She says to him, "You're becoming a pest," she told Luke. She felt his smile. Luke says, "Time to say goodbye." She responds back, "Not just yet." So he's pestering her, right? It's time to die, Leia, right? It's time to go. And you can almost see Mark Hamill or Luke Skywalker and doing this visually, right? But and then finally, we get the moment where she does pass. And there's a lot to talk about here because in the movies, it's kind of all happening at once. And there's obviously, we're so hyper focused on the battle between Kylo Ren and Rey that we don't get a lot of what happens with Leia on this side. And it's really great stuff. But so when she does pass, right before she passes, there's the next passage says, "Leia, there's only one thing left to do." And this is Luke talking to her. "Galaxy save us all from Big Brothers," she thought. Luke said, "You must try to reach Ben." "I never gave up hope on him," she said. "Tell him," said Luke. The effort to reach Ben would take everything she had left. So this is what we know in the movie, at least from the movie, or at least what we suspect, that whatever it was that was going on that she did in that last moment to get a hold of him before, finally he paused and Rey was finally able to, win the battle. She was all about winning in that moment. She had no idea what was going on. But this is what happened. It was Luke telling her, "You need to reach out to Ben and you need to tell him that you've not given up hope." There's that word again, that you've not given up hope on him. And that every effort to reach Ben would take everything she's got. And this is kind of why I think this kind of speaks to why she was, why she passed kind of right then and there. It just literally took everything out of her, the force out of her. Almost very similar to what we saw with Luke Skywalker in his force projection from Mach 2 over to Crate, right? The Battle of Crate.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, let me pause there and just kind of get your thoughts on, Luke being the pest that he was. And then we're going to get into just exactly what happens in this moment right here before she finally does pass. But, the idea that, she was, already thinking about Ben and that this was going to be her last act before she passed.
Well, I just love the fact that Luke obviously knows his sister. He knows her stubbornness. And he knows the only way to get to her is to pester her. And I think that's just a great addition to this book. I mean, it was great to see that part of their relationship. It kind of takes it back to the original trilogy, right? I got that feeling a lot. And I don't know if this was something that, obviously it wasn't something that continued when Luke went into exile, self-exile. But to know that this was happening after Luke had become one with the Force is just super cool to know. And the whole idea of him kind of urging her to do what she needs to do, I think that's just an awesome way to show their sibling relationship. And doing it in that kind of nonchalant way, but kind of also, just pushing her in the right direction. Like, come on, Leia, like, it's time now.
Yeah.
At the worst times, right? I just think that's great. And the whole idea of her sacrificing herself to turn Ben, I think that is just a significant way to go out.
Yeah. I mean, and that from a pure human being perspective, definitely, right? I mean, what noble way to go out of life than saving another's life, which is essentially what she did. But the fact that it's your own son, right? The fact that it's your own child.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that as a parent, I can tell you, yeah. I mean, there's no, there's no second thought about it. I'm sorry, there's not.
Yeah.
And what parent wouldn't want to be able to do that? What parent wouldn't want to be able to save their child? And I mean, she's doing more than saving him from drowning. She's doing more than saving him from hurting himself. I mean, right? I mean, yeah, you can argue that that's essentially what he's been doing and what's happened to him. But the idea that this is so much bigger because of the mystic force and because he's on the dark side and he's done horrible things and we talked about this, that if there was any one person that could forgive him, it would be Leia, and that in a lot of people's minds that's enough, right, to allow for a redemption or to be okay with a redemption of some sort. But the idea that the mom was able to save him is just one of the greatest gifts I think you could have as a parent, to know that you're helping your child even if you're not going to be around to kind of witness all of that. Although she is. Because in Star Wars, you get to be a Force ghost and you get to watch all of that, but we don't.
Yeah.
Maybe we do, depending on your religion. But so in that moment though, it's really cool because when she dies, there's this like rapid succession of like images that she has and thoughts that she has before she passes, and she has basically there's four moments, four images that she sees. The first is Ben as a child. The second, she has a vision of Luke on Octu, and I've kind of spoiled that one, but I'll get to that in a second here. Then she has an image of the Yavin 4 ceremony, so the medal ceremony from episode 4. And then like her last parting vision is of her dad, and not Anakin Skywalker, but Bail Organa. And it's just great. I mean, so I'm going to talk about each one of those here in just a second, but the idea that these four of all the things that come into mind, right, as somebody's about to die, you always wonder, like, what are their last images? What are the last thing they see? Well, for Leia, it was Ben, Luke, Han, and her dad, Bail, which I think is great. I think it's significant, and I really like the fact that that's exactly what happened here. So the first one, Ben as a child says, she flashed back to holding her tiny son in her arms, his black hair still wet with birth, the way he'd cried all the time in those early months, but settled whenever he sensed that she or Han or Chewie was near. His first steps, his first word, the first time he'd sent a toy flying across the room with the power of the Force, calling on his tiny toddler rage. Which is just, I mean, there's so much in that, right, to unpack. But the things that stood out for me in that passage is one, that she's reflecting obviously on Kylo or Ben as a child. But then this goes back to that whole, we were talking about the relationship between Chewie and Ben. She could sense how much Ben loved Chewie and how much Chewie loved Ben. She could feel that in the Force, which I thought was great. And then this the toddler rage, like if you've ever had a toddler or had to watch one, be it your own or someone else's, they can turn on that rage in an instant. And thinking about somebody like Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, and what he was able to do. Like my kid destroys a room in 2 minutes, but he's not using the Force, so I can't imagine just how devastated their room would be with somebody like him. But that was great. The next one was Luke on Octu. It says, with his words came a rush of knowledge and a vision memory of Luke sitting cross-legged atop a cliff of Octu, shaking with effort as he projected himself onto the battlefield of Crate. So that was her. That's what she saw. And that's all it says. That's all she saw was just a flash in that moment where he was doing that. And you're kind of left to really ponder why that would come into mind. And I chalked it up to what I said earlier about this was kind of being her own little, extra dimensional traversing thing, right? I mean, she's projecting herself now all the way across the galaxy to help Ben Solo, much like he was doing, like Luke was doing essentially to help Ben Solo, right? And then the Yavin 4 ceremony was the next one. It says her thumb went back and forth across the cool face of Han's medal. Her heart had been so full of hope then, after their first big victory against the Empire. Giving these medals to Luke and Han had been more than a public celebration. They'd been a symbolic awarding of leadership. She shared the burden ever since that day. Yeah, I don't know. That's and of course the medal, right? We know that the medal gets handed off to Chewie later on, and it's the last thing that she's holding there and that she's clutching, which we'll come back to. I got something else to talk about there. And then finally for Bail Organa, it says this, she had a vision of her father, Bail Organa. Bail Organa had been the one to teach her that. her adopted father had trusted her to find Obi-Wan Kenobi and save the rebellion when she was just a young woman with less experience than any of them. And so, of course, I think of like the Rogue One line where he's like, I trust her, I think he's talking to, I forget who Bale's talking to, but he mentions trusting this person, with his life, essentially.
Yeah.
So anyways, these are the 4 moments. What are your thoughts on them? I mean, I guess, besides the obvious, I mean, how'd they resonate with you? Was it good? Is there anything else that you thought she would have maybe thought about? Or were you happy with the idea that these were the thoughts that came to her and that these were the people that she thought of before she left?
I mean, yeah. I think when it comes to like Luke and Octo, right, that was kind of for me, it was kind of a strange, like, again, like why was that something she had thought of, right? Mm-hmm. But it says it was a vision memory. And I think that's really special because not only is she being able to watch it in real time where she's kind of sacrificing herself, she's kind of witnessing her brother sacrificing himself. So it's almost like an encouragement, like, it's okay. If you're going to do this, I'm going to do this. Like, I can do this. And I think that was really special. I mean, the other things were amazing too. I think it's cool that Bale's in there because he was her father. For all intents and purposes, he was. And as someone who looks up to their dad, like something like that is important. And you get the Yavin 4 ceremony. And obviously that was just a big moment in general for the Star Wars history. And I almost wonder if that was more for us than it was for her. I don't know if that's just, my own opinion or, I almost feel like there would be something like maybe her wedding or, but again, that's her friends, right? That was a celebratory time. But I thought it was special. And like that scene, just that, like I was reading it again today. I've read it so many times, but reading this section today, I got a little emotional again. It's just like, it's such a powerful scene.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's probably a show that we could do on that last line where it said she shared the burden ever since that day, right? The burden of leadership. And that was shared with her brother and her future husband. And, I don't know. There's a lot to be said there, for sure. Yeah. And then we get to the, at that moment in the novel, we finally have what they call the final act of hope. Again, there's that word, but the final act of hope. And that was the actual moment in which she reached out to Ben and calls him to the light and calls him to the light. Like I want to come back to that here in a second, but the passage says, so that's how it would be, a final act of hope. And then she would rest. She reached for the force, let it surround her, fill her. She thought the effort would exhaust her, but she felt a momentary rush of strength and energy as she connected with every living thing. She reached deeper and then deeper still. With all the life and love and hope and forgiveness in her being, she called out, Ben. So she yells that out through the force, and that is the moment in which Ben stops and pauses, right? And it's because she pulled him. And I'm taking this I'm taking this literally. I really feel, based on how the novel reads, that she literally pulled him. I mean, we know he was kind of walking the path. He could go one way or the other. He'd been tempted by the light side many times, and Snoke and Palpatine were all probably teasing him about that, or using that against him in a lot of ways. But she literally, figuratively, spiritually, through the Force, grabs that kid by the ruff of his neck and pulls him into the light. And it takes everything to do that, to the point where she does die. Now, I will say this: I don't like the idea that that's how she died, but I'm accepting that that's exactly what happened here, right? So. But yeah, she literally pulled him over to the light side. So what are your thoughts? So do you like the idea that she did that? Did you take that a different way in terms of what was happening there?
Yeah, I didn't take it as a physical sense. I took it more as like the spiritual sense of the Force. Just that connection of Ben with his mom, right? She's calling out his name. I think in my head, he hears that. He hears her say his name. We don't get that for sure. But that's my headcanon. And just the idea of just that overwhelming feeling of all that love, the forgiveness, the sacrifice. He knows that she passed. Rey knows that she passed. And he's feeling all of that. And it's that redemption that he feels, I think. I don't think so much of a pull, a physical sense, but more of that, just his heartstrings almost pull towards the thing that his mother had always wanted from him, or wanted for him.
Yeah.
To be the light and not to be the dark.
I can see that. And I guess there's a lot of things that are shameful about the Rise of Skywalker that have to do with Ben Solo, but we're not going to get into that. But one of the things that I felt, we don't know what, I would like to know what Ben was going through, like what went through his mind in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Was it more than this on his side? Did he have visions of things himself in that moment? Did she transpire these visions to him? Right? Maybe that was part of the message. It was more than just Ben, but did he suddenly see Bail Organa and himself as a child and, the medal ceremony?
Oh, yeah.
I
didn't even think about that.
Yeah, what if all these visions suddenly just hit him like a rush of things that he had never seen before and more, right? We don't even know. Maybe it could have even been a lot more than that. Maybe it was the wedding, or maybe it was tender moments between him and his dad that she saw through her eyes. Those are all kinds of things that I would think if it's just figuratively speaking, those are the things that would be powerful enough to really kind of push somebody over, right? Push somebody over the edge and kind of push them to the light. But we don't get to see that. We don't get to hear that. We don't get to read that. It's not in the novel, unfortunately. But anyways, so let's talk about Luke's welcome. Because there's a great moment here that we don't really get this in the movie, but it says, her last thought washed through the galaxy like a wave. She was vaguely aware of Han's metal clattering to the floor, a whir of sadness from R2-D2, and finally, a surge of welcome from Luke, who was not alone. And it's very ominous. It says not alone. It's got ellipsis there at the very end. So, I guess just put your tinfoil hat on, but who do you think's standing there with Luke Skywalker? He's obviously not alone. Somebody's standing there with him. It could be more than one person. It could be a single person, but who would you imagine Luke would show up with to welcome or greet his sister into the afterlife?
I imagine Anakin's there, right?
Oh, her dad?
Obi-Wan. Yeah. Obi-Wan, Yoda. It kind of takes me back to the celebration at the end of 6, right?
Yeah.
You've got Ben and Yoda there, with, people who put in Anakin, right? Where was Anakin?
Right.
But, I see that scene. And I guess it could go even as far as the voices that spoke to Rey. But in my head, that's who I see. Are those 3, and Luke, so those 4.
Yeah. Quite the welcoming party.
Yeah.
I think all those people are there. I don't know. I think like all the Jedi, that line, maybe it really was all the Jedi. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, but
I mean, packed room.
It'd be a standing room only kind of thing. But it's fun to think about. It's fun to think about like who all would be there. But I think they're definitely Ben Kenobi. I think, because they knew each other and she named her son after him and all that. That's kind of an obvious one. Anakin, but then you start thinking, okay, so what did Anakin look like? Was it young Anakin? Was it old Anakin? I don't know.
Right? Yeah, that's it.
She never saw him. She never saw her dad. She
Sure.
probably saw pictures of him later, but she never got to actually physically see them. So, and it's kind of one of those things like when, for anybody that believes in heaven, right? There's always this question about, okay, so when you die, what do you look like to people? Or how do people see you? Is it how you want to be seen, or is it how they see you, or is it both? Or it's kind of the same thing here. It's like, I don't know which Anakin shows up. Hopefully it's not the one on Mustafar with no arms and legs burning, still smoldering.
Scarred face, yeah.
Yeah, but anyways. So yeah, that's it's a great moment, and I'm glad we got that in the novel to know that, Luke was there waiting for her at the pearly gates along with a number of other people. All right, let's talk. We're on our last subject here. Let's talk about the legacy of Leia, and this was the line that I really felt like after I read this, I was like, okay, we've got to do something about Leia. We've got to do something with Leia about Leia. She's becoming a problem. No,
gotta do something.
Something that we needed to do a show about Leia because it just really stood out. It was very powerful. But it says, it's again referring to her legacy. If Vader could become Anakin again, Kylo Ren could become Ben. Her son was tempted by the light. She could sense it. But even if she never turned back the way Anakin, if he never turned back the way Anakin had, she still loved him, and her legacy was secure. She was Leia Skywalker Organa Solo, and she caressed Han's metal. She fully embraced all these inheritances, and she would pass them all to the next generation. Her Skywalker legacy would go to Rey, Organa to Poe, and she would try one last time to pass her Solo legacy to her son. So, I started this by talking about Leia and her names and all the titles that she had. But you think about her full name, Leia Skywalker Organa Solo. And she's talking here that she feels like she's passing on the Skywalker legacy to Rey. We kind of see that one. The one that we don't get so much in this novel, but maybe in some of the other novels for sure, is the Organa legacy, and that being passed on to Poe. We see that probably more in the movies anyways in The Last Jedi. And then this idea that she was going to pass on the legacy of her husband, her dead husband, to the person that killed him. Or at least maybe not exactly, but her son, that she was going to be passing that legacy on to Ben Solo. And that one that one bites me a little bit, because I think with Rey, she can see that legacy move on. She's going to be able to bear witness to that. With Poe, she definitely is going to be able to bear witness, but guess what? She's passing on the legacy of Solo to Ben, and Ben dies. Or maybe, and I don't believe this, but I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe that legacy of Ben Solo was him saving Rey. So anyway, give me your thoughts there on the legacy of Leia, all the different names that she had, and maybe your take on how each one of those played out or could play out.
Well, after reading this novel and seeing that part where she wants to have her Skywalker legacy passed on to Rey, made Rey taking the Skywalker name a little easier to swallow for me personally, just because it's something that Leia had wanted. And how is that legacy going to move on? How is that quote unquote Skywalker legacy going to move on if there's no longer a name Skywalker? Now, as an Organa, with Poe, I think, again, like you were saying, it's been much more obvious in the movies, and there's been a handful of other books where this just makes a lot of sense. And we see Poe come to leadership in The Rise of Skywalker. So I think that's cool, right? She doesn't so much get to see him take on the legacy. She gets to watch him learn and watch him fail and fix his mistakes and learn from it, or more of a learn from his mistakes, not fix them. But she kind of gets to bear witness to that a little bit. But the Solo legacy, I mean, just her knowing that it worked, I think is enough. Mm-hmm. But then again, too, we get the whole idea where if she is a Force ghost, right, what is she bearing witness to? Does she get to watch what happens when Ben sacrifices himself for Rey? So she sacrifices for him, and then he does it for another who she also cares about. So it's kind of just this loop of love, right? Even if you don't like the idea of love when it comes to Rey and Ben, it is a love, even if it's not like a romantic love. There's sacrificing yourself. You're not just going to do that for someone on the street, right? I mean, I don't know you, right? I don't know everyone out there, but that's a legacy in on itself.
Yeah. This is there's a lot to think about here on this one, and just the legacies and all that. I think the key takeaway for me was just that she has been a lot of different people through her life, and she's been different people to different. She's been different people to different people. I guess if that makes sense, right? And it just kind of goes, part and parcel with who all of her experiences, and how she's so dynamic and she's so complex, that different people were getting things that they needed from her as a mentor and as a leader, or as a mother figure or a parental figure in some way. So all of that speaks to her, to the amazing woman that she is and was, right? So, all right, and then let me just leave you guys, before we get to the final question, leave you with this little image here. The thing that stood out to me, when it talks about Leia's kind of clutching Han's metal close to her heart, and I can't remember honestly if we see it in the movie. I mean, we do see her laying there with it, and it finally falls off to the side and clatters on the ground there. But the thing that sticks to me is that Padme's funeral, and we see her with that the Japper snippet, that was given to her by Anakin, and she's kind of clutching that and holding it. But I thought it's kind of I don't know, poetic, right? It rhymes. You've got mom who passed away and kind of clutching something that was dear to her, given to her, something that meant something to somebody else that she really truly loved. And you've got the same thing happening here with Leia. That of all the things that she had, it wasn't the dice, it wasn't his jacket, it wasn't whatever it is. It was the one thing that she was holding on to from Han was this token of leadership, and the idea that of all things, like, who would have ever thought from what we saw in Solo: A Star Wars Story and what we saw in Episode 4, that as powerful and as strong of a leader that Leia is, that that was the one thing that she was tying to Han. I mean, maybe it was the only thing she had left. I don't know. But again, benefit of the doubt, I think it's just something cool that she saw him as a leader. And you think about how goofy he was as a leader at times, right? Especially like in Return of the Jedi and all that. But anyways, I think it's just very, it's just poetic that they were both kind of clutching something that was super important to them, either at their death or shortly after their, in the case of Padme, at her funeral. So, all right, last question. Do you think we're ever going to see or hear Leia again?
Oh, man, I don't think we are. Just because her ending, I feel like it has a nice, the door's closed. She's been welcomed in, right, by Luke and whoever else it was. We have that little moment of Rey kind of looking over and seeing Luke and Leia together. I think that's just a nice little bow to Leia.
Yeah.
She's somewhere with her brother. She's still there. She's not, physically there, but she's still there. The last thing she did was that sacrifice. And I think that's a wonderful ending, right? We talked about this earlier. I think if we were to bring her back, I think it would diminish that sacrifice a little bit. Unless of course it was like something from long ago, right? When she was still alive. But Leia as she is now as a Force ghost, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it, excuse me, I think it goes back to the question about whether, what's Star Wars look like for us here in the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. If they ever go back and revisit this era of Rey, either immediately after, shortly after the Rise of Skywalker, I would think we would see Leia again. I would like to see Leia again as her mentor, her Force Ghost mentor, much like Luke was to Rey. I would like that it's suddenly Leia that took over. And I like the idea that it's Rey who, even though she's had Master Luke this whole time, and now she has access to Yoda and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan Kenobi and whoever else, right, is speaking to her at this point, right, a couple years down the road. I like the idea, I would like to think that the one person that she still confides in the most and the one person that she calls out to the most and the one person that answers her the most is Leia, and that this relationship that they started as mother and daughter, Padawan, master, all that continues on even after, the afterlife, right? I would be okay with that. If it goes any further, though, I don't know. I don't think we do. I don't think there's any more. I don't think there's anything left for Leia really to tell us or in the story other than to be that guiding light for her, so to speak. That be her being Rey from the grave or from the beyond as a Force ghost kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, she's lived an amazing life. I mean, there's so much content here that we've gotten from Leia, from Rebels and the movies and all the novels and the comic books that we're getting now, from stuff that happened after Episode 4 and now stuff that happens just before Empire Strikes Back. I mean, there's just so much that we've gotten. There's a lot more to be told. So, she's lived a full life, I guess. So
yeah,
I wouldn't be sad if we didn't see her again. How about that?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for jumping on the show, Makayla. Thanks for talking about Leia. This was fun. There was obviously a lot to talk about. And a lot of it we did not get in the movie, which I thought was awesome. So definitely cool. So read the novel if you haven't had a chance to do so. I stick to my word. I think it's still better than the movie. All right. Shout outs. Quickly, I just want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members and to all of those that engage with us on social media, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. It's always fun. So continue to do that. We're going to try to up the social interaction here very soon if we're not done already. So be looking for that. And then we're going to try to post more questions about what we're talking about here on the shows and see if we can get you guys to answer and engage a little bit more there. I know we're long overdue for a listener question show, so that should be coming here pretty soon. Over on the network, Petticoats and Poppies is our newest show. They've got a few shows under their belt, so please check them out. Nicole and Maggie are doing an amazing job there. A lot of fun, a lot of great stuff to learn from periodic film history. The Film Appraisers, obviously, they've got shows that they're cranking out. Check them out if you're a movie buff, or if you're not. It's a lot of fun to get those movies appraised at a cash value. And then we've also got CAD. We did a CAD show not that long ago. We've got another one in the works there. So that's Cantina After Dark. That's a show that's exclusive to Patreon members. Mike's still rolling with 3 Quarters to Play if you want to check him out. He's mostly doing that on YouTube. And we've also got some new shows that are in the works. I know we've been talking about that, teasing it for a little bit. They're coming along just fine. So be on the lookout for those as well. Before we go, if you want to contact us, you can do so on Instagram at the CantinaCast, Twitter at the CantinaCast, Facebook /the CantinaCast. You can send us an email at cantinacastfanmail@gmail.com. Text or voice 803-717-CAST, C-A-S-T. And if you'd like to join us on Discord, there's a lot of fun stuff happening there. You can find all of the show hosts. I think all of them are on there, actually. Makayla included. We're all on there. So you can join on there, jump in, talk to us on Discord. If you don't know what that is, just click the link in the notes. It's easy to connect to, and you don't need to download an application. If you want to access it through a web browser, you can do that as well. So it's kind of convenient. Leave us a note or good word or bad word on iTunes if you can. And obviously, if you want to help financially, you can subscribe via Patreon and donate as little as $1 per month to help with the show finances. So thank you all of our Patreon members who do that each and every month, especially in these hard times. Okay, and with that, we're going to close the show. Makayla, any final words before we go?
Well, I'm just glad that out of the 7 sections that we actually had with Leia in this book, we were finally able to say goodbye one last time to our princess.
Aww. With that, we will see you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.